What truly shapes our society? Is it, an expanding government? Or is it the incredible power of individual freedom? It's a huge question.
It really is. And it seems to drive so much of our public discourse, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a really compelling set of sources that reveal this this battle over how our world should operate.
Yeah.
We're highlighting foundational ideas that have influenced policy for decades. You'll discover how principles like free enterprise, limited government, and a strong national defense gained traction.
Right.
And how that led to pretty significant shifts in areas from regulatory frameworks, all the way to individual choice in education.
And these aren't static ideas either. As societies evolve, new challenges pop up constantly, economic trends, shifts in financial markets, social landscapes.
And even evolving judicial interpretations.
Yeah.
We'll explore how these core principles get tested, looking at the ongoing debates over government regs and how court decisions sculpt our liberties.
And there's even something interesting in there about technology, maybe changing fairness in financial markets for everyone.
Exactly. So our mission in this deep dive is to unpack these complex ideas, these real-world outcomes, and help you understand the important connections between, philosophy, policy, and just everyday life.
We're trying to extract the most important insights from the sources you've provided, basically offering you a shortcut to being really well informed on these critical topics.
Okay, let's get started then. To really understand the forces shaping our nation, we have to unpack some core beliefs, the ones that underpin a lot of the policy discussions. We're talking about principles like free enterprise, limited government, individual freedom, traditional American values, and a strong national defense.
Right. And these aren't just abstract concepts floating around. The sources show they've been actively championed by influential organizations, like the Heritage Foundation, for example.
That's a key point. And connecting this to the broader intellectual history, many of these ideas trace back to pretty pivotal moments in economic thought, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. For instance, the Mont Pelerin Society, it was founded back in Switzerland by economists like F.A. Hayek and Milton Friedman.
Right, post-World War II.
Exactly. Specifically to counter the prevailing sort of collectivist trends at the time and to really rigorously defend capitalism. In fact, one of their, let's say, more outspoken members, Ludwig von Mises, he was so staunch against state expansion that he apparently once declared to his colleagues, "You're all socialists."
Wow.
Yeah, it really underlines the passionate defense of these free market principles back then.
So if these are the foundational philosophies, what do our sources suggest about their actual real-world impact? Does economic freedom really translate into, a more prosperous society?
Well, it's not just theory. The data from the sources really tries to illustrate this point. They highlight that countries with higher levels of economic freedom generally show, immense improvements across key metrics.
Like what specifically?
Prosperity, health, education, you name it. We see global poverty significantly reduced, which demonstrates the benefits, according to these sources, of global free trade and free market economies.
That's a powerful claim.
It is. And conversely, the sources argue, nations with low economic freedom often remain stagnant. Their conditions barely change from decades ago, whether you look at per capita GDP or other measures of human well-being.
That contrast, it really makes you think about alternative systems, doesn't it? We often hear about the perceived strength or maybe the efficiency of centralized economies.
Yeah, and this brings up a really crucial consideration. While countries like, say, the Soviet Union often appeared incredibly powerful externally.
Right, military might.
Exactly. But the sources reveal this profound internal disconnect. It limited their ability to actually serve their own citizens. Condoleezza Rice, reflecting on her visit in 1979, this is a great anecdote from the sources. She vividly describes seeing an abacus being used to ring up purchases in a store. An abacus. While knowing full well the country had intercontinental ballistic missiles.
That's quite the image.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
It just perfectly illustrates how centralized control, even with immense power and, tech prowess in certain areas, can struggle profoundly to provide basic goods and services to its own people.
So the sources see this as showing the failures of socialism compared to the self-correcting mechanisms of a market economy.
That's the argument presented, yes. A stark reminder that even military might can't necessarily overcome fundamental economic inefficiencies.
Okay, that's a powerful image. Now, moving from the sort of foundational philosophy, How exactly did these ideas start to manifest in concrete policy changes, especially when political alignment shifted? This is where it gets really interesting, I think.
Yeah, definitely. One area where the impact seems undeniably clear is in regulatory reform.
Okay.
Our sources highlight how organizations, like the Heritage Foundation again, played a significant role. For example, they apparently influenced the Trump administration's huge regulatory rollback in 2017.
How so?
Well, David Kreutzer, an alumnus of Heritage, was described as playing an important role in shaping and writing the executive order that rescinded technical documents on the social cost of carbon.
Gotcha.
Beyond that, we saw the lifting of the Obama-era moratorium on coal leases and a reconsideration of key regulations like the Clean Power Plan and Waters of the United States.
So quite a few big ones.
Oh, yeah. The administration reportedly embraced 208 of Heritage's mandate policy recommendations.
208? Wow.
Yeah, leading to projected savings of billions for the American economy, according to those sources. Now, this wasn't just about numbers. These policy shifts represented a pretty fundamental reevaluation of the government's role in the economy.
Aiming to unburden businesses, spark growth, that kind of thing.
That was the stated goal, yes. But of course, it also ignited these crucial debates about balancing economic freedom with social and environmental safeguards. That's always the tension, isn't it?
It seems like it. And these regulatory changes, they weren't just happening through executive orders, right? They needed a legal framework. This is where the judiciary became such a critical battleground.
Absolutely critical.
Yeah.
The sources really emphasize the significance of judicial appointments as a way to embed these ideas for the long term.
Makes sense.
Heritage, for instance, played a role, the sources say, in Justice Neil Gorsuch's nomination and confirmation. And Judge Brett Kavanaugh received their Defender of the Constitution Award.
Okay.
And a major ongoing legal debate they influenced centers around this thing called Chevron deference. It's a legal principle where courts typically defer to government agencies' interpretations of ambiguous laws.
Right, let the experts decide sort of thing.
Kind of. But the sources indicate a pushback against that. This doctrine is currently before the Supreme Court in cases like Loper Bright Enterprises v. Raimondo. And House Republicans, led by Speaker Kevin McCarthy at the time, were pushing hard to rein in what they call unelected bureaucrats.
Trying to restore legislative power, basically.
That's the idea presented, shifting that interpretive authority back to Congress, away from the agencies.
Okay. Now, speaking of individual choice, I saw some really fascinating details in the sources about education reform. How did these ideas manifest there?
Yeah, education reform is definitely another key area where these principles gained significant traction. Our sources point to the work done under Lindsay and Burke at Heritage's Center for Education Policy.
What did they do?
Well, they were involved in Arizona significantly expanding its Education Savings Account program, ESAs.
Ah, school choice.
Exactly. This program now covers all 1.1 million school children in the state. What it means for parents is they can direct at least 90% of state education funds into personal ESAs.
And use that
for private school, tuition, tutoring, homeschooling expenses. A range of things. It really exemplifies this idea of school choice. And the sources suggest this is an example of how policy can shift the Overton window. You know, that range of ideas considered politically acceptable.
Making something that seemed radical, maybe more mainstream.
Precisely. Like Milton Friedman's original vision for education choice, making it far more politically acceptable and well implemented.
It's clear these ideas shaped a lot of domestic policy, but the sources also show their influence extended to national security. What's the connection there?
It's really compelling to see how foreign policy was influenced by these same principles: strong national defense, limited government overreach, that kind of thing. Our sources detail Heritage's role in championing initiatives, like imposing economic sanctions on Russia for violations of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty. They also advocated for barring any lowering of our nuclear force alert levels. And on the international stage, they apparently helped convince the administration to push back against Chinese pressure regarding Taiwan. Resulting in significant arms sales, $1.42 billion worth.
Wow.
And senior research fellow Bruce Klenger's research directly influenced Senator Ted Cruz's proposal to relist North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism.
So influencing specific legislative proposals, too.
Seems like it. Even the State Department's internal restructuring, eliminating some of those czars or envoys, was influenced by a heritage expert, Brett Schaefer. according to the sources. It's a really wide reach.
Yeah, from internal policy all the way to global strategy. And we can't overlook the economy-wide impact of tax reform, right? That's often seen as a cornerstone of the free enterprise philosophy.
Absolutely. The sources strongly highlight Heritage's influence on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Key figures like Stephen Moore and Adam Michel were pressing hard for these pro-growth reforms. They even talk about a potential round 2 of tax reform, drawing a direct parallel to President Reagan's approach.
Signaling it's an ongoing effort.
Exactly. A sustained effort to reshape the tax landscape, not just a one-and-done kind of thing.
Okay. Now, it seems that while these ideas have had significant influence, seen concrete policy implementation, new challenges and differing viewpoints are constantly emerging. It's not a static environment, is it?
Not at all. And this brings up an important question. How are these core principles viewed in the modern political landscape? Our sources delve into how the modern progressive movement is perceived by some commentators within those materials.
And how do they describe it?
Well, in pretty strong terms. Some describe it as having a political religious cult characteristic, driven by what they call a political will to grab, expand, and keep the power of the federal government.
Strong language.
Very. These same sources also highlight what they refer to as the adoption of new terminology or nonsense words, things like climate catastrophe or minoritized. They suggest this is a strategic shift in language to advance an agenda.
Okay, so that's one perspective presented in the sources on the progressive movement.
Yes, it's a very particular framing of the opposition, as presented in the materials we reviewed.
And economically, what do the sources indicate about the long-term stability of the nation given these differing approaches?
Well, they point to a significant challenge in fiscal policy, the rising federal spending, driven largely by Social Security and Medicare. That's a big one.
Right, the entitlement programs.
Exactly. And while sustained economic growth helps, it's not seen as enough on its own. Policy changes like price indexing Social Security benefit.
Meaning benefits rise with inflation, not wages.
Potentially, yes, which could slow their growth. And gradually increasing the retirement age, these are debated solutions to address the fiscal imbalance.
And what about other economic areas like banking?
Stephen Moore, the Heritage Fellow mentioned earlier, also critiques new banking regulations in the sources. He argues that increased capital requirements for banks, basically making banks hold more capital, are unnecessary.
And the concern is
that it will make borrowing costs more expensive and loans harder to get, potentially hindering economic growth. That's his argument.
It sounds like there's also a pretty significant generational divide in how these ideas about economic systems are received.
That's a really crucial takeaway from the data presented in our sources. It shows that young Americans, those aged 18 to 29, have surprisingly positive views about socialism.
How positive?
51% expressing a favorable opinion, compared to only 45% for capitalism. That's quite a split.
Yeah.
And this coincides with the trend highlighted in higher education, where sources note attacks on free speech and increasing ideological conformity.
What kind of examples do they give?
They discuss instances of mandatory diversity statements on controversial cases like that of Sir Roger Scruton. Apparently, a hit piece misrepresented his views, leading to his temporary removal from an advisory commission before he was ultimately vindicated.
Suggesting an environment where maybe certain ideas struggle to find open expression.
That's the concern raised in those sources, yes.
Now, beyond direct government action, there's also this conversation happening about crony capitalism. What does that mean in the context of our sources?
Yes, some sources warn about distortions within the market itself, arguing that not all market activity is truly free.
How so?
Joe Lonsdale, for instance, critiques the financial sector. He states that investment banks don't simply operate as, quote, pristine capitalists, but rather create the incentives and influence the regulators.
Blurring the lines between market forces and regulatory capture.
That seems to be the argument. The pharmaceutical industry also faces scrutiny in these sources. Arguments that high drug prices aren't purely market-driven, but are influenced by subsidies and barriers to competition that the industry itself helped put in place.
Okay.
These examples underscore this tension between the ideal of genuine free markets and systems where special interests might heavily influence policy, potentially for their own benefit.
Right, not necessarily for the broader societal good. But there's a truly surprising fact in the sources that connects back to markets and fairness, particularly regarding technology. This one caught my eye.
This is really fascinating, and it's kind of a powerful counter-narrative, isn't it? The consumer lending discrimination in the FinTech era study.
What did it find?
It found that historically, Latinx and African American borrowers were charged significantly more interest on mortgages. We're talking an aggregate of $765 million extra per year.
That's a huge disparity.
Massive. However, and this is the major silver lining from that research, FinTech algorithms discriminate 40% less than traditional face-to-face lenders.
Wow, 40% less.
Yeah, and crucially, these algorithms apparently do not discriminate in loan approval at all.
Really? No discrimination in approval?
According to this study, yes, which prevented somewhere between 0.74 and 1.3 million minority applications from being rejected between 2009 and 2015.
That's incredible.
It really is.
Yeah.
It suggests that removing that face-to-face interaction and leveraging these market-driven algorithmic platforms can significantly reduce discrimination in lending.
Maybe by increasing competition or just encouraging more shopping around?
Perhaps both.
Yeah.
It's a compelling example of technology potentially advancing fairness in a really unexpected way.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've explored how these core ideas of economic freedom, limited government, how they're debated, put into action, and constantly challenged in our modern world. It's clear that the battle of ideas, like the Mont Pelerin Society discussed way back when, it's truly an ongoing one. It shapes every aspect of our lives.
Yeah, what really stands out is how deeply intertwined these sort of philosophical concepts are with the tangible policies that affect our economy, our individual liberties,
Right.
and even the basic fairness of our financial systems. The discussion around institutions and their ability to either promote or hinder freedom, it's vital, and it's a constant push and pull.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, as you move forward, considering these powerful forces at play?
Well, here's maybe a provocative thought for you to consider, based on everything we've discussed from the sources. Despite the clear historical benefits, as outlined by some sources, of economic freedom and the documented failures of centralized control, why do societies continue to grapple with movements that propose ever-increasing government intervention?
Even when past lessons might suggest otherwise.
Exactly. How do we ensure that genuine debate, based on evidence and different perspectives, prevails over ideological rigidity in securing a prosperous future for everyone? Something to think about.